Although I took the stage to receive my PhD in chemistry, I can't say that my life has always been easy. My name is Thomas Prentice. I am 31 years old and engaged to Heather Thompson, a PhD in chemistry. I belong to the Prentice family, the same family that owns and operates most of Prentice Chemicals. My mother's great-grandfather founded this company. When my grandfather passed away, he owned 40% of the company. After his death, 30% went to my mother and 10% to me. My mother is Dr. Joan Prentice, the CEO of the company. I say general, but in reality she controls absolutely everything. As far as I know, her desire to be in control was one of the reasons why my father, George Hogan, left the family when I was 4 years old. Unfortunately, he died soon after in a car accident. Why is my last name Prentice and not Hogan? Again, this is due to my mother. After her father's death, she changed her last name, both hers and mine, to her maiden name in order to preserve the family name. While I was growing up, it felt like I never had a father because my mother removed all the photographs and any other things that could remind me of him. She even forbade my father's family from seeing me. At school, I was always a diligent student. Although I did not have much choice, my mother kept me under her control. No sports, no friends, no family trips other than lab tours. She saw no point in rest if it was not related to chemistry. I graduated with top grades in high school. I liked chemical engineering better, but my mother didn't want to hear about it. Chemists invent what chemical engineers simply produce, she liked to say. Although I wasn't fully into chemistry, I did well in college, finishing in the top 5% of my class. Then I got my master's degree and now my doctorate. My mother got her PhD from Harvard, so I went to Harvard too. I actually wanted to go to MIT or Stanford, but Harvard had the advantage of being on the East Coast, whereas my mother lived on the West Coast in San Francisco. This gave me the opportunity to grow and become independent without her constant control. You can't get a master's degree or a doctorate without having a strong character. Of course, if I had not followed my mother's advice, I would not have met my fiancée, Heather Thompson. She is 32 years old, 163 centimeters tall, and incredibly cute. Maybe not everyone thinks so, but for me, she is the most beautiful. We met on the first day of orientation in the PhD program. At Harvard, I was going to ask her out, but during one of my visits to the university, my mother met her in the laboratory and insisted that we have dinner together. Heather was delighted with my mother. Heather and I got along great, but sometimes I wondered if she was with me for my sake, or because she was impressed with my mother. We dated for 2 years, and soon after we started living together, I proposed to her. We planned to get married after we found stable jobs after graduation. After the graduation ceremony, Heather, my mother, and her parents and I went to the graduation dinner. The conversation was about the future, about where we want to work after graduating from university. Heather dreamed of working for a large chemical company, and I wanted to go into teaching and research at a university. The mother sat, smiled, but did not say anything, which was unlike her. I knew that this was not without reason, and soon I found out what she was up to. When dinner came to an end, the mother stood up and said, "Heather Thomas, I want to tell you how proud I am of you, and I also want to let you know that I have found a job for you too at Prentice Chemicals. Congratulations." Heather jumped up and ran into her arms. "Thank you. This is incredible. I was so hoping to get into a large chemical company," she exclaimed. Her parents smiled and congratulated us both. And I just smiled tightly, realizing that my mother again wanted to keep me under control. I decided not to make a scene, but to talk to her alone. The mother continued, "Heather, I read your dissertation, and I think it is very important for the company to move forward in the direction of synthetic clean fuels." Ah, that's it, I thought. She wants Heather, and I'm just joining in. Later, after Heather dropped her parents off at the hotel, I finally had a chance to talk to my mother. "Mom, you know I was going to work at Harvard," she replied. "So how are you going to be married if Heather works at my research center in California and you stay at Harvard? You understand that she will agree." You could have at least told me in advance before making such big statements. I was indignant. Okay, maybe I'll consider working at Stanford then. Nonsense. You should work at Apprentice Chemicals to continue the family business in the future, she said. This is not up for discussion. And she just left the room. I knew that I had no chance of getting a job at the university. Even if I find something, she will interfere. All that remained was to agree and see how wonderful the work under her leadership would be. When Heather returned, she was beaming with joy. That night was stormy. The conversation had to be postponed until the morning. Over breakfast, I tried to discuss it anyway. You wanted to work in Boston, and I wanted to work at Harvard. What about our plans? Don't be stupid. Do you understand what opportunity your mother is giving us? Heather answered. I understand that she sees benefit in this for herself, but she also wants to keep me under control. No, she wants you to be part of this breakthrough, so that we can take over the company when she retires, said Heather. Just think about it. I thought, a few days. The main disadvantage is losing Heather. So we moved to San Francisco and started working. 3 years later, Heather was on the verge of a discovery that her new synthetic fuel could reduce airplane emissions by 50% without major changes to the engines. I was working on a related project, and for progress, I often needed information from her team. Her assistant turned out to be the most useful in the work, Jennifer Panich. She had a master's degree in chemistry and was simultaneously studying for an MBA. She had an amazing talent for seeing projects on a larger scale and understanding their value. Heather was sweet, but Jennifer, she was amazing. A real beauty, just like Brenda's song. Her parents were from Thailand and emigrated, oddly enough, to Madison, Wisconsin. Jennifer was born there and received a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She then earned a master's degree in chemistry from the University of San Francisco and began working for Heather after graduating. She got the job shortly after Heather, and I moved to San Francisco. Jennifer and I began spending more time together, having lunch together, and when Heather canceled dinners with me to work late or have business meetings with my mother, she even invited Jennifer to go out to dinner with me. I think she thought that if I didn't eat dinner alone, I wouldn't bother her about working long hours. This was a problem at the beginning of the project. I constantly complained to her that there was no need to work so hard. This project is designed to last for many years, and at this rate, she will simply burn out. Her answer was always the same. She didn't want to disappoint my mother. I managed to convince my mother to force Heather to take time off. We ended up having great holidays and long weekends. When we spent time together, everything was the same as when we were at university. We were a real couple. The problem began when we returned to work, and a third wheel again appeared in our relationship, my mother. As soon as Heather returned to the company, it was as if a switch flipped in her head. She began to idolize my mother, and I became the third wheel. We were still living together and engaged, but Heather had never broached the subject of marriage, and I decided not to press the issue just yet. I even suggested that since we both earned good money, we should buy an apartment or a house so as not to spend money on rent. She wasn't interested. As for sex, everything depended on the project. If she had a day when progress was in full swing, we would have energetic and satisfying sex. If it was a bad day and she was extremely annoyed, she would simply use me as a sex toy. As soon as she achieved pleasure, she immediately turned away and fell asleep. Remember how I mentioned my interest in chemical engineering? I was able to take several courses in this area while receiving my master's and PhD. This gave me some insight into the difficulty of turning a discovery into something that can be produced economically. My project was a variation of Heather's fuel. It didn't reduce emissions as much as its version, but I noticed one problem. Its fuel was difficult to produce on an industrial scale. My version was much simpler. Jennifer understood this, so she provided me with all the necessary information. I raised Heather's fuel production issues with her and her mother. But the mother replied, "Stop interfering with Heather's project and focus on your own. Its fuel is a key part of the company's future." That night at home, Heather and I had an argument. She accused me of trying to undermine her project and drive a wedge between her and my mother. I knew that as long as my mother fully supported Heather's project and did not want to listen to my reasons, Heather would not see the light either. There was no point in arguing further, a losing option for me. So I decided to shut up and play the long game with my project. I apologized to both of them, saying that I had made a mistake in my analysis of their work. They won't see their mistakes anyway. I knew that Heather had meetings with my mother once a week, where they most likely discussed me, including my opinion on Heather's project. So I planted a recording device in her briefcase. That same night, I took it out and listened to the recording the next day. It shocked me how low they thought of me. I didn't even realize how little my mother valued me and how damaged the credibility of my abilities was in Heather's eyes. My mother even said that I needed to be transferred to the administrative department and removed from research. I understood my place in the hierarchy and knew it was time for me to leave, but I wanted to complete my research. One day over lunch, Jennifer confided to me. I don't understand why, but its fuel, although it looks great on paper, is not economically feasible. I replied, I know, but my mother is a person of ideas. She was always lucky, and all her projects went into production without problems. She doesn't want to listen to me. I slept on the couch for a week after I brought it up with her and Heather. Don't discuss this with Heather, it could slow down your career. When Heather was nearing completion of her research, I didn't see her for a long time because she was immersed in work in the laboratory. During this time, I began to think about my father and his family. The only thing I knew was that he and my mother met when they were both undergraduate students in chemistry. I decided to do some research and hired a professional genealogist to find out what I could find out about my father's family. A few weeks later, he sent me a report. It turned out that my father's family owns a small chemical company in Los Angeles called Lossa Chemicals. This means that interest in chemistry is in my blood. My father's parents have passed away, but he had a sister, Susan Hogan. She served as vice president of operations for the company. She was married and had 2 children. Moreover, she did not change her last name after marriage. The president of the company was her uncle, my great-uncle George. My father was named after him. I decided that I needed to reconnect with my family on my father's side. As soon as Heather has some free time, I will contact them. Jennifer ran into my office. Thomas, you need to see this. Heather is already in the home stretch, and they have begun drafting a patent application. You should read it. I started studying the document. Jennifer and I discussed various points as we read, and suddenly I saw it. So, this patent application details Heather's work, but it leaves a huge gap that leaves my overlapping research unprotected. I looked at Jennifer. Can we keep this a secret? She looked at me with a question in her eyes. I don't trust my mother, and I'm increasingly doubting my relationship with Heather. We are moving away from her. The fact that my work was not included in the patent gives me freedom of choice. Jennifer hugged me and promised that she would keep it a secret. The day finally came and Heather's project was completed. It was a Monday afternoon, and my mother had thrown a big party to celebrate Heather's work and also sent out a press release to announce the new fuel. My mother gave a speech full of praise for Heather, talking about how her work would help the company continue to grow. I stood at the end of the hall, away from the celebration. Jennifer came up to me and took my hand. Thomas, she said, you should be there with them. I replied, if my mother wanted me to be there, I would be there. Plus, she asked me to meet her in her office after the celebration. I think I know where this is going, but I'm ready. Later, I arrived at my mother's office for an audience. It turned out that Heather was there too. My mother started, Thomas, I think you'll agree that Heather's work is a turning point for the company. Because of this, I think we should stop your project since your fuel won't be as clean as Heather's. I am also appointing Heather as Vice President of Research. I want you to move into the administrative department of the company to learn how the rest of the business works. After your wedding, you will both be ready to take over the company when I eventually retire. Heather immediately added, Isn't that great? Your mother and I have already planned everything. Once we get married, we will become the power couple of the company and secure the future for the next generation of apprentices. I considered possible scenarios. I assumed that my project would be closed, but I did not even realize how far they had gone in their plans without my participation. Now it's my turn to speak. What if I want to continue my research? I can finance them myself. I saved a significant amount from dividends from the 10% shares of the company I owned. Moreover, my finances were beyond my mother's control. She didn't even know about them. I invested wisely. By this time, I already had over 100 million. Since I attended the schools she chose for me, she paid all my educational expenses. The mother replied, Thomas, why do you need to spend money on this? This will get you nowhere. Well, Mom, if it's useless, then why don't you give me the rights to my research? Consider it a gift as part of your plans for the future success of the company. She looked at me, then looked at Heather. She just shrugged. Okay, said the mother, let it be your way. Great, I said. Here are the documents. Please sign below on each copy and we can move forward with our future plans. She looked stunned. What do you mean? Do you already have documents? I tried to keep a neutral expression on my face. Well, I assumed that since Heather's project was so successful, there was a good chance that you would cancel mine. So I decided to protect myself. Consider this just my personal project. I want to see it through to the end so that I know that I have completed what I started. Don't worry, I'll work on it in my free time. This will not affect my future employment with the company. The mother looked at Heather again. They did not foresee this development of events. However, in their overconfidence, they still believed that my research would lead nowhere. She took the papers, quickly looked through them, and signed both copies. I already signed them in advance. I carefully put my copy in my briefcase and took out the next document. Mom, thank you. Now let's move on to the next point. What else? She asked irritably. I took out a tape recorder and played a recording of their conversation in which they made derogatory comments about me and my abilities. Here is my resignation letter. It takes effect immediately. Since you both have such a low opinion of me, I see no point in staying here. They looked at me with their mouths open. They were shocked. They probably didn't think I was smart enough to record their private conversations. And finally, Heather, here are the keys to our apartment. I have re-signed the lease and utility bills in your name and have already moved my things to storage. You can keep the wedding ring. I don't need it anymore. Heather looked shocked. But why? Why are you leaving? We were planning to get married. Heather, since we moved here, we haven't had much of a relationship. We moved away from each other, and the fact that you and my mother secretly planned my future behind my back only proves how deep the gulf between us has gone. As they say, you were too carried away by mother's sandpaper. I continued. For the last year, we have lived more like roommates than an engaged couple. The only time we were really together was on our holidays. Besides, you always assigned Jennifer to watch me like a child. I think it's time to admit the truth and part ways. Heather collapsed on the sofa in her mother's office and burst into tears. The mother spoke with anger. You ungrateful idiot. Do you even understand what I did for you? Is this how you repay me? I've given you the perfect wife and the perfect job so that the Prentice name will remain at the helm of the company for many generations to come. Mom, you have never thought about what I want. Yes, it was your push that got me here, but I did all the work myself and ended up getting my PhD. So yeah, thanks for the direction, but I'm proud of what I've done, and now I want to choose my own path. Perhaps one day I will return to Prentice, but it will be on my terms and on my time. I turned around and left. Behind me, I heard my mother screaming and Heather sobbing as I closed the office door behind me. After running into Heather and my mother, I left the building. I saw Jennifer walking towards me. She grabbed my hand. What's happened? I told her that I quit and that I broke up with Heather. Jennifer looked shocked. She didn't know about my plans. I felt like I could trust her, but knowing that she worked for Heather, I wasn't sure how far that trust would extend. Where are you going? She asked. I'm not 100% sure yet, but I have a few ideas, I replied. Can we meet for a drink in the evening? Jennifer suggested. I looked at her. There was a ray of hope in her eyes. Of course, I said. Today I will stay at the Hilton. I have a few things to do, and then I can meet you at the bar. Say, at 10? She smiled widely, kissed me on the cheek, and said she would see me there. As I approached my SUV, the phone rang. It was Heather. I didn't want to talk to her, so I turned off the old phone and turned on the new one with a different number. I thought that a new life might require a new number. I jumped into the car and drove to the warehouse where I moved most of my things. I was amazed at how detached Heather was from our relationship. She didn't even notice that I'd been quietly moving things out over the last few weeks. I didn't care about most of the items in the apartment, just clothes and memorabilia. In the trunk of the SUV were the most obvious things whose disappearance would raise questions. Diplomas hanging on the wall, a few photographs I wanted to save, remaining clothes, and my computer. I unloaded them into the storage room and placed the signed agreement transferring the rights to the research to me, along with copies of them, in the safe provided by the storage company. Then I headed to the hotel. It was 9 p.m., and I decided to take care of my future. I pulled out the genealogist's report on my father's family and called his sister. I was a little nervous when I heard the beeps. Finally, a woman answered the phone. Hello, Susan Hogan is listening. I cleared my throat. Hello, I know this may come as a shock to you, but this is Thomas Prentice. I mean Hogan, your nephew. Please don't hang up. I want to say a couple of things before you answer. I took a deep breath. I know that my mother has completely cut you and the rest of my father's family out of my life. This was wrong. I asked the genealogist to find my relatives on my father's side, and she gave me your contact information. I want to connect with my father's family. Can we meet? There was a pause. Wow, Tommy, it's been so many years. The last time I saw you was at the funeral. Yes, I'll be glad to meet you. Where are you now? When can we see each other? I exhaled the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I'm in San Francisco. I can fly to Los Angeles tomorrow. Maybe we can meet for dinner. That would be wonderful. Maybe you'll come to my house. My husband and I will be glad to see you. That would be great, I said. We confirmed the address and dinner time, and then I ended the conversation with, Thank you. See you tomorrow. Everything went better than I expected. I didn't know how she would react. I had already forgotten that my father's family always called me Tom or Tommy. It was nice to hear that name again. I looked at my watch and realized that I would need to book a ticket after meeting Jennifer. I went down to the bar. Jennifer wasn't in sight yet, so I sat down at a table with a good view of the entrance. The waiter brought my drink, and I raised my glass to take a sip when I saw her. Wow, I've never seen her in this outfit before. She was wearing a stunning red dress and high heels. As she passed by, several people turned around. She giggled as she sat down at the table. Shut your mouth, otherwise the fly will fly in. Wow, was all I could squeeze out. I thought after a day like this, you could use a little visual distraction. You definitely coped with this task. Sorry for the drool running down my chin. She took a napkin and pretended to wipe away an imaginary drop. The waiter came over and she placed her order. So, she said, what happened in the office with your mother and Heather? I briefly told her about their plans. Then he explained how he managed to get an agreement to transfer the research to me, as well as how my dismissal and separation from Heather went. And you just happen to have all these documents and your resignation letter with you? She asked in surprise. I explained, well, I've seen for a long time where this is going. In my mother's eyes, Heather's research was the future of the company. Once she got the results, she no longer needed my research. As for Heather and I, we had been estranged for a long time, and she was more interested in career advancement and the role that my mother had painted in her head. Therefore, I consulted with a lawyer in advance to prepare an agreement for the transfer of research to me. I also completed the paperwork in advance to remove my name from the apartment rental agreement and utility bills. Jennifer gasped in surprise. Now it's my turn to say, wow, why didn't you tell me anything? I winced and replied, to be honest, this is probably the first time in a long time that I took control of my life. I knew I could probably trust you, but you work for Heather, and I had to make sure nothing interfered with my plans. I looked down. I'm really sorry that I didn't let you in on my intentions. Jennifer took my hand in hers. No, I understand. She then lifted my chin and kissed me on the lips. Now it's my turn to apologize. I've wanted to do this for a long time. Look, I want to be honest with you. I really like you. I saw how Heather treated you, so I tried to keep our projects connected. I enjoyed our lunches and dinners together, and I don't want to lose touch with you. I hope I can stay in your life. I looked at her for a moment, remembering our time together over the last couple of years, and smiled widely. I would really like that. We hugged. What are your plans? She asked. Well, first I'll contact my father's side of the family. I have already written to my aunt. I haven't seen her or anyone from my father's family since he died when I was 4 years old. When I get back to my room, I'll book a plane ticket to fly to Los Angeles tomorrow and have dinner with them. I'm a little nervous, but I need to figure out my life before I move on. In the short term, my goal is to create conditions where I can complete my fuel research. I think there are only a few months of work left. Jennifer asked, do you want me to support you when you meet your father's family? What if something goes wrong? Can I go with you tomorrow? Thank you, that would be great. I really appreciate your support. I'll book tickets and a hotel for both of us. By the way, I need to give you my new number. I started a second phone and turned off the old one to avoid calls from Heather and my mother if they suddenly tried to contact me. I just need to take a break from them for a bit until I figure things out. We exchanged numbers. Great. Today you had a long, emotional day. When you buy your tickets, send me the details, and I'll pick you up on the way to the airport. We got up. Jennifer came over, hugged me tightly, and kissed me a kiss that I will not forget for a long time. See you in the morning, she said. I sent Susan a message asking if it was possible to come with someone else, and she replied, more the better. Back in my room, I booked my flights and hotel, and then fell asleep thinking about that hug and kiss. The next day, Jennifer picked me up at the hotel, and we flew to Los Angeles. Her house was on the opposite side of the airport, so it was more convenient. We checked into the hotel. I booked separate rooms for us. Jennifer called Heather to ask for a few days off. She, of course, pretended that she knew nothing about what happened after the celebration. Jennifer told me that Heather sounded like she hadn't slept at all and asked her if she had talked to me. Jennifer replied that, other than seeing me leave in a hurry yesterday, she had no further contact with me. Heather asked her to tell me if I got in touch that she wanted to talk to me. Jennifer simply agreed, but did not find out anything. Before going to Susan's, we met at the hotel bar for a drink and to calm my nerves a little. Jennifer knew most of my story, but I told her a little more about how my mother had removed all traces of my father, including changing my last name. She took my hand and assured me that no matter how this evening turned out, she would be there. I hugged her. The taxi dropped us off at Susan's house just in time for the appointed time. I bought a bottle of wine and flowers as a sign of good intentions. Susan's husband, Nathan, met us at the door. He greeted us warmly and joked that the flowers were for him and the wine for Susan before she walked out the door herself. We just stood and looked at each other. As far as I remembered, in her face I saw the features of my grandmother. She broke the silence. It's really you. You look so much like your father. Then she came over and hugged me tightly. They invited us into the house. I introduced Jennifer as a friend who had come to support me. Susan hugged her too and said, "Thank you for helping him return to our lives." Susan said that dinner wasn't ready yet, or rather that she ordered it because she wanted to spend more time with me and not in the kitchen. I understood her. I briefly told the story of my life. He hardly mentioned his relationship with his mother, but described the main events. He said that he had recently broken up with his fiancée and left his mother's company. When dinner arrived, we sat down at the table. Susan asked, "Tommy, Just one question. Why did you decide to contact us right now? I took a deep breath and replied, You see, I need to take control of my life. My whole life has been guided by my mother. I don't regret or be angry about where I ended up, but recent events have shown that I'm not going where I would like to go. I don't know if you knew how much my mother tried to erase the memory of my father from my life after he left and died. But the fact that she changed my last name from Hogan to Prentice should say a lot. Susan nodded. Yes, your mother made it clear that you belong only to her and that we should not try to participate in your life. She even went so far as to threaten our company. You know that in some areas we compete with Prentice chemicals. She threatened to bring down prices and ruin us if we even tried to contact you. This was a terrible blow for my parents. First they lost their son and then their grandson. A tear rolled down my cheek. When I saw where my life was heading, a few months ago, I turned to a genealogist to find information about my father's family. When I read the report and learned that my grandparents had already died, I terribly regretted that I had not done this earlier. I sighed and Jennifer squeezed my hand in support. I smiled at her and continued, I know I can't bring back the past, but I hope we have a future together. Susan smiled. That would be wonderful. We've been waiting for this. Maybe you can come to the company tomorrow? Will you have lunch with Uncle George? With pleasure, I replied. I would really like to meet him. We mostly made small talk for the rest of the evening. Susan and Nathan told us how they met and about their two children. Their son, Frank, is a high school English teacher, and their daughter, Patricia, is a chemical engineer. They hope to one day bring Patricia into the family business, but so far she has resisted it. At the end of the evening, which went much better than I could have dreamed, we said goodbye. Jennifer and I returned to our hotel. We wished each other good night and went to our rooms. About an hour after I settled into my room, there was a knock on the door. Jennifer asked if she could come in. She said, I'm so glad I came, and I'm so glad that everything went well. They seem like really nice people. But I have to go back to work on Thursday, and I have exams on Friday. I'm only a few months away from completing my MBA. I hope you understand. I took her hands and said, Having you here means a lot to me. I understand. I'm still figuring myself out, but I understand. Completing your MBA is important, and you need to keep your job. I'm fine. I'm looking forward to meeting my great-uncle tomorrow. Then I pulled her towards me and kissed her on the cheek. She hugged me and gave me one of those kisses on the lips again. When we pulled away, I looked into her eyes and said, Listen, I want you in my life, but until I figure out my plans, I can't make any promises. You continue to work for Heather and complete your MBA. We will keep in touch and meet whenever we can. I don't know if I'll stay in Los Angeles, return to San Francisco, or split between two cities, but in the time you have left to study, I should figure out where I'm going, and then we can decide what to do next. She lowered her eyes, thought, and then looked at me again. I'll miss you, but let's keep in touch. I have your new number. I'll also keep an eye on Heather and your mother and let you know if they're up to anything you should be concerned about. Thank you, I said, hugging her tightly. She said goodbye and went home. I had a room booked at the Hilton in San Francisco for a week, but needed to extend my stay in Los Angeles for one more night. I also canceled my morning flight back to San Francisco. I will rebook when I decide exactly when to return. The next morning, Jennifer and I had breakfast together. We chatted about various things, as we usually did at lunch, and then I walked her to the taxi. We hugged warmly, kissed, and she left for the airport. Now I faced the inevitable Heather's call. First, I turned on my old phone. It was filled with messages and voice recordings from Heather and my mother. The messages from my mother were threatening at first, but later she became more concerned about my well-being as I did not respond. Heather's messages began with pleading, then turned to anger, and then to worry she was worried if I was okay. I didn't want to talk to my mother at this point, but I felt like I had to call Heather back. I dialed her number. She answered after the first ring. Oh God, Thomas, are you okay? Your mother and I were so worried. Where are you? I'm fine. I just needed to leave town to sort myself out, I replied. Heather said, Okay, I know the meeting didn't go as planned. I should have discussed our future with you beforehand. Sorry. When will you return to your apartment and work? Heather, I already said everything I wanted to say. I won't be back. Over the past 3 years, you and I have gradually grown apart. You didn't want to move forward in the relationship and only saw me as a fuck toy depending on how your project was going. But it was only because of the project. It's complete, now we can move on. Your mother and I are already making plans. I interrupted her. Yes, you and your mother are making plans. Where are my plans? But why do you need plans that don't include me? I sighed heavily. Ever since we graduated from university, you and my mother have been inseparable. You excluded me from all important decisions, and when you didn't have time for me, you assigned your employees to babysit me. I talked about getting married, about buying a house, but you kept putting it off. The only times we were truly a couple were our vacations, when we were away from the project and away from my mother. I paused for a second, then asked, If you really want me to stay with you, are you ready to quit? Maybe we should go back to Boston and start over like we planned before we graduated. I gave her my ultimatum. She was silent for a minute, and then she seemed to start crying. But this project is my child. Don't make me choose. I knew that this was what was going on. She wanted to bring her fuel to production. That's why I had to make a decision for both of us. I'm sorry, Heather, I don't want to stop you from doing what you want, but I can't go the same route. I need something for myself. When you talk to my mother, tell her that one day I might return to the company. I don't hate her, I just need to live outside of her shadow. I heard her crying. Heather, I'll call you when I'm done with myself. Goodbye. I pressed the end call and turned off the phone. I sat for a few minutes, remembering the good times, but realizing that I needed to let go of the past and look to the future. I got ready, went down to the lobby, and took a taxi to the Loss a Chemical office, where I was scheduled to have lunch with my great-uncle. When I arrived, I went to the front desk and asked to see my uncle. The secretary asked who she should introduce. Tell Tom Hogan is here for lunch, I replied. She looked at me carefully as she conveyed the message. I was sure she was wondering where the last name Hogan came from. A few minutes later, George appeared. He stopped, looked at me, and hugged me tightly. I've been waiting for this moment for so long. I thought I wouldn't make it. You look so much like your father. Come on, Susan is waiting for us in my office. We were chatting on the way, and he asked, I thought your mother changed your last name to Prentice. Yes, but I plan to return my real last name. Although I love my mother, she took away a part of my personality when she changed my last name. It's time to bring her back. George beamed happily. Welcome back to the family. We entered his office. Susan was already there and was just helping herself to food. She put the plate down and hugged me. I'm glad we didn't scare you. We sat down, had lunch, and chatted. My uncle had many questions about my background, my education, my plans, and so on. He then asked if I would mind if one more person joined us for lunch. I said I don't mind. He picked up the phone, and soon after a man came in with some documents. George introduced us. Tom, this is Ted Ferguson. He's our corporate lawyer. I invited him because there is an issue that needs to be settled after your father's death. I looked at him in bewilderment and motioned for him to continue. You see, this company was founded by my father, Matthew Hogan. He had 2 sons, me and your grandfather, Frank. When my father died, he left us equal shares of the company, 50% to me and 50% to Frank. When Frank passed away, his 50% was to be divided between your father and Susan. He nodded toward Susan, and she nodded affirmatively in response. But your father died before Frank, so the 25% that should have gone to him went to you. However, you were only 4 years old at the time, so they were placed in a trust. Since you and I had no contact, they remained in the trust. Now that you're back, Tom has prepared the documents to give you control of this trust, ownership, and 30 years of profits. I leaned back in my chair. I didn't expect anything like this. Wow, I wasn't ready for this. It's a great honor. Can we put this off for a couple of weeks? They looked at me with bewilderment. I turned to Ted. Ted, before I take control of the trust, I think that in honor of my father and grandfather, I should first legally change my last name back to Thomas Hogan. Can you help me with this? Tom replied. It would be an honor for me. He extended his hand to me, and we shook hands. While we were finishing lunch, I turned to my uncle. Uncle, there is one more question that I would like to discuss with you and Susan. I'm looking for a job. Do you know where I could find her? He smiled. I think we'll find something for you. Judging by your education, we will be glad to see you on the team. Is there a particular direction that interests you? Research, I answered. At Prentice, I was developing a project that I would like to complete. Don't worry, I have the rights to this research, so there won't be any conflict with Prentice. I can provide copies of the agreement with them, which states that the research belongs to me. Basically, I just need access to a good laboratory. Even without the trust, I have the money to complete the project. George looked at Tom and Susan and said, Okay, let's see what you have, and we'll work out the details later. Great, I said. George stood up. Unfortunately, Tom and I have appointments. Susan, why don't you show Tom our labs? With pleasure, she replied. Ted, nice to meet you. Tomorrow, most likely, I will need to go to San Francisco. Can you prepare the documents to change your last name by next week? Ted nodded. I will prepare the papers to start the process. It usually takes about 2 months to change your last name in California. I said goodbye to George, and he invited me to dinner to introduce him to his wife, Nancy. Susan gave me a complete tour of their lab. They were much smaller than Prentice, so they didn't have all the equipment they needed, but I had the money to fill those gaps. Lhasa was primarily involved in the production of chemicals for clients rather than research. After the tour, I returned to the hotel to get ready for dinner. Susan and her husband Nathan were to join us at George's house. Susan and Nathan picked me up at the hotel. When we arrived, we were greeted by my great-aunt Nancy. She hugged me and warmly welcomed me into their home. At dinner, we remembered my father. They told me many stories about him and his family. After dinner, we moved into the living room where I told them about my research into sustainable aviation fuel. I explained what Heather was working on and the problems I saw with the mass production of her fuel, and then described the differences between her formula and mine. Nancy used to work for the company, but is now retired. She was more involved in legal and contractual issues. She asked several questions about the legality of the company taking over the research started at Prentice. I explained in detail Heather's patent situation and the document my mother had signed giving me the rights to my designs. They said they're looking forward to getting to the bottom of things because if the research is successful, it could be a big benefit for Lhasa Chemicals. However, they noted that they probably did not have the production capacity for large-scale production, but decided to leave this issue for later. After another round of goodbyes and hugs, I said my goodbyes and promised to return next week. Back at the hotel, I texted Jennifer a few times about how successful my day had been and that I was looking forward to seeing her in San Francisco. In response, she sent me a message with a kiss emoji. I slept well that night. My flight back to San Francisco was uneventful. I arrived before lunch, went into the hotel, and left my things. I texted Jennifer about dinner, and she said she was looking forward to it. She invited me to her place at 7 in the evening. I decided it was time to find a more permanent home in Los Angeles. Spent the day studying websites with advertisements for short-term rentals of furnished apartments. I left the furniture with Heather, and until I knew how long I would stay in LA, I didn't want to spend money on new ones. Tomorrow, Friday, I'll start making calls. I also need to meet my mother. I contacted her secretary. I didn't want to talk to her directly. I asked her to see if she could have dinner with me on Friday. The secretary promised to inform. I went to Jennifer. I had stopped by to pick her up many times before, but this was the first time I went inside. She opened the door with a big smile and hugged me. Her apartment was very modestly furnished, which surprised me. The dining table turned out to be an ordinary folding table with folding chairs. She noticed my gaze. My neighbor recently got a job in New York and took almost all the furniture. Sorry, I'm in a temporary situation for now. It looks like she took everything, I said. She replied, well, she owned almost all the furniture. She was planning to move in with her boyfriend in New York, so the only thing she left behind was her bed. But you know, it's not very comfortable to sit and have dinner on a bed. So I borrowed the card game table and folding chairs until I found something better. I just hugged her and said, as long as I'm having dinner with you, I don't care what your apartment looks like. She blushed and went into the kitchen. Dinner will be ready in a few minutes. Just sit down and we'll eat. During dinner, she asked how it went for me. I spoke briefly about the trust and my plans to resume research at Los Chemicals with my family. She frowned. So you're going to move to Los Angeles? Yes, but I plan to travel here many weekends to see you, and maybe you can come to me. I'm interested to know how our relationship will turn out. You only have a few months left until you graduate from your MBA, and by then I will also know how things are in my father's family, and hopefully we will know how our relationship is going. She smiled. Well then, when you arrive, you will have to look for a place to spend the night. I doubt you'll want to stay with your mother or Heather. I have a spare bed. She left the thought unsaid. That would be great. I reached out, took her hand and kissed it. She came over, hugged me, and sat on my lap. Maybe we should check out of the hotel this evening. I asked, do you want to go to the hotel and help me pack? She grabbed her purse and we headed to the hotel. In just a few minutes, I packed my things and checked out of the hotel. On the way, we chatted. Jennifer, I want to do everything slowly. We've known each other for several years now, but I don't want to rush. I understand you just broke up with Heather on Monday. Your wounds are probably still fresh right now. I also want everything to be right. I unpacked my things in her apartment. The next morning, I had to go to the warehouse to pick up the remaining clothes. We spent the rest of the evening chatting and watching a movie on my laptop before heading to our rooms. The next morning, Jennifer left for work. Since she didn't return the key to her neighbor's apartment, she gave it to me. I realized I needed to do some laundry and set to work while making calls about temporary housing. I found a couple of options close enough to the Los Chemicals office and made an appointment on Tuesday to look at them. I emailed Ted, Susan, and my uncle saying I would be at their office on Monday and looking for a place to live on Tuesday. My mother's secretary called and said she was free for dinner that evening. She booked her favorite restaurant for us at 6 p.m. I went into the warehouse and picked up more clothes. Then I went to the safe, took photographs of the signed agreement on the transfer of my research, and sent them to Ted for verification. On Sunday, I will pick up one of the copies of my research from the safe and bring it with me to Los Angeles. I spent the rest of the day reviewing my research and compiling a list of equipment that would be needed for testing. We also had to contact one of the aircraft manufacturers to gain access to their engines for fuel testing. I looked at the clock. It was time for dinner with my mother. I arrived at the restaurant. She ran there before me and had already taken her usual table, from which she could see everything that was happening in the hall. I quickly looked around to make sure she was alone. Half of me expected that she might have brought Heather with her. I sat down and took the menu. There was complete silence. I think we were both waiting to see who would speak first. Finally, she began. There was tension in her voice as she tried to remain polite. So, where have you been? I didn't want to reveal anything so she wouldn't interfere. I was on the move. I was looking for possible places to resume research. Politeness gave way to condemnation, and it lasted longer than I expected. I don't understand. Everything was planned for you. Why are you doing this dead-end research? You know Heather is the future. Listen, I'll set up a separate unit for you. You will become its president and will be able to work on any project you want. Mom, you just don't understand. Since birth, you have controlled the direction of my life. Now I want you to understand that I am grateful for your support and I love you. I am where I am today because of you, but I need to find my own path. Yes, I love Heather, but I have my own plans, and unfortunately, you and Heather have an idea of what I should be, but that's not what I want. She stared at me for a moment. I didn't want to argue, I just wanted to end the conversation and hopefully avoid a situation where she would hire a private investigator to follow me. We barely spoke for the rest of dinner. She tried to tell me how the project was going, and I just nodded, agreeing that everything was going well. We said our goodbyes, and I headed back to Jennifer's apartment. When I returned, Jennifer hugged me warmly. I told her I survived dinner. I asked what she would do this weekend. She had MBA project work to work on. I said I understood that I had my own things to do, getting ready to meet Susan and George on Monday, but if she needed a break, to let her know. On Saturday night, we went out to dinner and watched a movie. I chose the food, and she chose the movie. We often ate lunch and dinner while working, but a romantic dinner was a completely different step in our relationship. Holidays aside, it's been a while since Heather and I spent an evening in a romantic setting. It was nice to experience it again, this time with Jennifer. We held hands at the movies and kissed during the romantic moments of the movie. Returning to the apartment, we lay down on her bed, kissed for a long time, and fell asleep together for the first time. She was upset when I left for the airport on Sunday, but knew I would be back by the following Friday. On Monday, I spent time with Ted. He had the paperwork to change my name. The process will take about 2 months. One of the steps was to publish notice of the name change in the legal section of a Los Angeles newspaper for 4 weeks in a row. I made sure to choose a newspaper that was unlikely to attract the attention of Heather or my mother. We also reviewed the transfer agreement for my research, which my mother signed. Ted said the document looked reliable. Once I bring the original, we will safely store it along with all important company documents. We also discussed the document that George and I would sign, giving Lossa Chemicals access to my research for review. I spent the rest of the day getting to know the lab members on Susan's team. I took with me a copy of my research and a list of equipment I estimated would be needed. Since I was going to look for an apartment on Tuesday, we agreed that we would continue working on Wednesday. This gave them a day to become familiar with my work. On Tuesday, I met with the real estate agent, and we looked at the 2 properties I had selected. The agent also found 2 more similar options. I liked one, a 3-room apartment in a guarded building with separate garages for each apartment. The 3rd room was equipped as an office. It was available right away, so I signed the lease and received the keys. I agreed to a 3-month term followed by a monthly extension. I called Jennifer to let her know I had found a place to live. We agreed that I would return early Friday afternoon, then empty the warehouse into my SUV, meet her at her apartment, and we would begin the long drive to Los Angeles. She'll help me get settled on Saturday and then fly out on Sunday. I spent the rest of the week with Susan's team. After George signed an agreement to access my research, they began studying it and asking questions. We also touched on the benefits of the fuel that would come out of my research compared to the fuel that Heather and Prentice were producing. The plan was that Susan and George would give an estimate next week of how much they were willing to invest in research. On Friday, I returned and collected all my belongings from the storage room and safe deposit box. Then I picked Jennifer up, and we made the long drive to my apartment in Los Angeles. Along the way, I learned about the weird music Jennifer likes to listen to. She and the music made me smile. I was falling in love with her. We stopped several times for fast food and for breaks, but made it on time. Arriving at the apartment, we moved the most important things from my SUV into the apartment and immediately stretched out on the bed. The next morning, I took the remaining things out of the car and began unpacking them while Jennifer worked on her MBA. After lunch, we went shopping to get what I was missing. I only had things and mementos, but I needed almost everything for the kitchen and bathroom. We decided to have dinner at home and cook dinner together. It wasn't anything pretentious, but it was fun. We distracted ourselves with hugs and kisses while cooking. After a long day, we snuggled up on the couch and watched a movie. I started to really like it. On Sunday, I drove it past the Lossa Chemicals plant. She noticed how much smaller it was than Prentice's. I agreed, but added that if my fuel worked, everything would change. We then made one last shopping trip for the apartment to get what we were missing. We went to a nice restaurant, and then, unfortunately, we had to say goodbye. I gave her a ride to the airport. She said she was free next weekend. I promised to fly in and surprise her. She asked what it was, and I put my finger on my lips and said it was a secret. The next week was spent refining and analyzing my research. Susan and George decided that there was a risk, but they were willing to let Lossa Chemicals fund the remaining research. We agreed on financial terms in which I would be paid a percentage once Lossa Chemicals' investment had paid off. The most important thing for me was that, apart from living expenses, I would not have to touch my investments. Jennifer was texting me about my surprise next weekend. In fact, at that time I had already come up with a surprise, and having learned that she had free time, I wanted to do something special for her. I discussed ideas for a romantic weekend with Susan. We spent some time in her office looking at options and settled on a cottage in the Carmel Valley wine region. The cottage had a hot tub and fire pit. I also made a reservation at one of the exclusive restaurants for Saturday evening. I called Jennifer and told her to pack for the weekend, grab a swimsuit, and a couple bottles of wine. With the deal with Loss Chemicals, I was able to start thinking about the future. The weeks were now devoted solely to research and project planning, but it was the weekend with Jennifer that I was most looking forward to. Jennifer met me at the airport, and we left. I knew the address of the cottage from the GPS on my phone, but kept it secret so she wouldn't guess where we were going. We grabbed dinner along the way and arrived at the cottage around 9 o'clock. We threw our bags inside and quickly changed into swimsuits. I tripped over a piece of furniture when I saw her in a bikini. She was stunning. After she helped me up, she hugged me tightly and kissed me. We poured ourselves a glass of wine and dove into the hot tub. We chatted a bit about how our weeks had been. I told her about the research agreement we had. She said Prentice was making progress with the fuel, but progress was slower than Heather expected. I didn't go into detail because I was now working for a competitor and I didn't want to put her in danger if they found out about our relationship. Then we switched to lighter topics, and then Jennifer decided to surprise me. She knelt down in the water and then stood up and sat on my lap as she took off her bikini top. Her small, perky breasts looked divine. I know you're not ready to go all the way yet, but I thought I'd show you a little preview. Just look. No touching. She giggled, and we kissed for a long time while she pressed her bare breasts against my body. At this point, we decided to return to the cottage for the night. We dried ourselves off and fell asleep. I held her in my arms, and we fell asleep together. The next day, I organized something like a wine tour, the equivalent of a pub crawl through wineries. I hired a guide to take us from one winery to the next, so we could enjoy the wines without worrying about how much we drank. We tasted a lot of wines and bought several cases that were delivered to my apartment in Los Angeles. The restaurant I booked was within walking distance of the cottage. We had a wonderful dinner and started talking about our future. I asked her if she would like to move to Los Angeles with me as soon as she finishes her MBA. She thought for so long that I momentarily panicked, thinking that I had misjudged our relationship. But then she smiled and said, "Of course I'll go. I'm really happy with us." "Great. And also send me a copy of your non-compete agreement so I can show it to the lawyer. Maybe I'll even find you a job nearby," I added with a wink. We leaned towards each other and kissed for a long time. The evening was a little cooler, so when I arrived at the cottage, I lit a fire in the fire pit, and we enjoyed more wine and toasted marshmallows. We talked about maybe going to Wisconsin together so I could meet her parents. That night, we relaxed in the cottage. We drank more wine, watched a bad movie, and went to bed. Waking up in the morning with her was simply wonderful. I tried not to pester, but during the night her shirt moved, revealing her beautiful breasts. She must have noticed that I was moving, and with a wide smile, she pulled me away, saying, "Don't even think about anything. Not a single touch. GRRR, well, I think a kiss will do." I pulled her in for a kiss. Unfortunately, we had to pick ourselves up and return to reality. We took a leisurely drive back to San Francisco and had a nice dinner before she walked me to the airport. She agreed to come to Los Angeles the following weekend, even though she had to work on her MBA. As I watched her drive away, I thought, I don't know how much longer I can wait. I licked my lips, tasting her lipstick, and headed to my flight. The next week, my team and I were busy selecting the necessary equipment. Some parts won't be available for another month, so we got to work with what we could find. Jennifer sent me her non-compete agreement. I discussed it with Ted. The document clearly stated that she could not conduct research for a competing chemical company for 6 months after leaving the company. However, nowhere did it say that she couldn't manage research projects. She just couldn't be directly involved in research. I knew it was a bit of a stretch, but it was enough for me to talk to Susan and George. I met with them and proposed hiring Jennifer as a research manager. Since research was not a priority at Lossa Chemicals, we needed someone to head up this department and take some of the workload off of Susan. The manager had to deal with contracts, monitor the progress of work, ensure that the necessary resources were obtained, and so on. Once the non-compete expired, she could move on to more hands-on work, and her experience at Prentice would be very helpful. They asked if it would be weird if I worked for my girlfriend. I replied that now I work for my mother, and my future is being supervised by my ex-fiancée, so this is a trivial matter for me. I also told them about my future plans, and after a short discussion they agreed, but said they wanted to talk to her first. I suggested we have dinner on Saturday so they could discuss everything at the same time. The weekend arrived, and I picked Jennifer up at the airport, then drove her to her apartment. I asked how much MBA work she had left and whether she could free up Saturday. She said yes, if she could work tonight and Sunday before her flight. I said that would be fine. Returning to the apartment, she got to work, and I started preparing dinner. Then I cleaned up and did a little work myself before we went to bed. She tried to hint about plans for Saturday, but I only replied, "We need to be somewhere at 10 a.m." At 10 o'clock, we arrived at the first house. Last week, I started talking to the realtor who found me this apartment about looking at houses because I would need something more permanent soon. Jennifer looked at me confused and I said, I thought we could have some fun imagining our future together and looking at houses where we could live. She lit up with excitement and almost pushed the realtor as she walked through the door of the first house. We looked at 4 houses, and when we got to the 5th, the last one for today, I realized, even though I had seen them all only on paper, this particular house seemed to me the best for us. During the tour, we both couldn't help but say, wow. The house was completely renovated with a 3-car garage, a huge kitchen, 4 bedrooms, and 2 offices. One of the bedrooms was the master bedroom, with a shower room that could fit 5-6 people and a bathroom that could easily fit 2 people. In the courtyard, there was a stunning view, a swimming pool, and a jacuzzi. The look on her face told me, this is the same house. I nodded to the realtor, and she started filling out the paperwork. I quickly sent a text message, and soon Jennifer's phone rang. She replied, Susan, how can I help? There was a moment of silence, then she looked at me and said, give me a minute, Susan wants to discuss something with me. And Jennifer went out into the yard. I agreed on this with Susan in advance. My birthday was coming up next week, and Susan had to keep Jennifer busy for a few minutes, asking me what I wanted for my birthday while I worked with the realtor to put together an offer to purchase. I wanted the home purchase to be a surprise for the future. The house was on sale for $6 million, but the realtor recommended starting with an offer of $5.7 million, since the property had been on the market for several months. We completed the paperwork just in time for Jennifer's return. To support the deception, I asked, what did Susan want? Jennifer thought for a moment and then said, Susan was cooking a dish today and wanted to know if I had made it before and maybe if I had any cooking tips. I simply nodded, accepting the explanation. We wandered around the house for a few more minutes, and I said, imagine, someday we might buy a house like this for our future family. She hugged me and kissed me. That sounds like the perfect dream. We thanked the realtor, and I winked at her. It had already been decided that we would call back on Monday about the offer. Returning to my apartment, we cleaned up. At this point, Jennifer was in a full flirting mood and started changing her clothes in front of me. I still wanted to wait for that special moment I had in mind, but she was having a very hard time getting me to continue to abstain. Later, we arrived at Susan's. George and Nancy were already waiting there, as well as Susan's children, Patricia and Frank, and Patricia's fiancé, Jose. I introduced Jennifer to Frank, Patricia, and Jose, and we chatted in the living room while Nathan and Susan put dinner on the table. Over dinner, we discussed various topics. I learned that Frank teaches high school English and Patricia works in chemical engineering. Jose, who works at an investment firm, talked about some of the nuances of investing. For dessert, they brought me a birthday cake and sang "Happy Birthday" to me. This was my first holiday with my paternal family since I was 3. I burst into tears and thanked everyone. After the cake, Susan and George asked Jennifer to talk to them and went into the home office while the others relaxed in the living room. When they returned, Jennifer was beaming with excitement, and Susan and George gave me their stamp of approval. We chatted a little more and everyone said goodbye. On the way back to my apartment, Jennifer asked, "Did you know they were going to offer me a job?" "Perhaps I knew something about this," I said with a sly smile. "Was this your idea?" "Perhaps I was involved in this," I replied. She hit me on the shoulder, leaned over, and kissed my cheek. "This means that I will be your boss." "Well, temporarily," I said. "What do you mean?" "You see, my original plan after graduation was to take a research position at a college and teach. Once we start producing this fuel, I hope to do just that. Then my career will be separate from yours. You will achieve great success with or without me." She kissed me on the cheek again. "Thank you for believing in me." We went to bed early so she could get up early and continue working on her MBA. Now, with the job offer, it was more important than ever for her to complete everything on time. While she was working, I decided to do something exciting: laundry. I also prepared lunch and dinner for us. We kissed nicely on the couch, and I walked her to the airport. Before I left, I said that I would bring a written job offer with me when I arrived in San Francisco the following weekend. The week was relatively uneventful, except for closing the deal on the house and filling out a job offer for Jennifer. This was very important for me. I had to raise the offer on the house by $100,000, but it still came out below the asking price. The house passed the inspection, and I set a closing date in 4 weeks. I specified in the offer that I was allowed 2 visits to the home and contacted interior designer Susan. We were going to meet at the house for the final inspection. I arrived in San Francisco on Friday evening. Jennifer met me, and we grabbed a quick bite before settling in at her place for the weekend. She was making her last effort to finish her MBA, so I gave her as much time as possible to work. In a month, we will live in the same city, work in the same company, and even live in the same house. Saturday dinner was going to be difficult, a birthday party with my mother. Jennifer went with me to the restaurant. I told my mother that I would bring someone with me because I thought that with the job offer for Jennifer and the fact that she was almost done with her MBA, nothing bad would happen if they found out we were together. Mother was already there, and unexpectedly, Heather was there too. She jumped up to give me a big hug, but when she saw Jennifer next to me, the atmosphere immediately became somewhat tense. I squeezed Jennifer's hand to let her know we were in this together. Jennifer said, "Hello, Heather." Heather replied coldly, "I didn't know you were dating." I realized that I had to intervene. I only wanted to tell half the truth. "Well, after I broke up with you and left, Jennifer called me a couple of days later to see how I was doing. We met and had a good talk. We spent so many lunches and dinners together because you were too busy, so we thought we'd find out if there was something more between us, and we started dating. We don't know where this will lead, but we decided to try." Heather looked upset and glanced at my mother. I thought maybe they were going to try to get us together tonight, but Jennifer's presence ruined their plans. My mother intervened. "Well, Jennifer, We're glad you're here to help us celebrate Thomas' birthday. We had dinner. Heather and my mother tried to ignore Jennifer while questioning me intently about what I had been doing for the past month. I replied that I had almost found a place to conduct research. I squeezed Jennifer's leg under the table a couple of times to let her know that I was still there and thinking about her while we endured this interrogation. Then they tried to engage me in conversation again, telling me how well things were going with the fuel. At this point, Jennifer squeezed my leg, as the hint she had given on Friday night that the fuel problems I was talking about were starting to show up. After dinner and a cupcake with a candle, we said goodbye. As Jennifer and I walked to her car, we heard Heather and my mother arguing about her. As soon as we got into the car, I said, "I know you weren't planning on resigning for another week, but if things get really bad with Heather, you might as well do it sooner. If you need anything money, moving out of San Francisco, etc., know that I have your back." Jennifer smiled widely and hugged me. Returning to her apartment, we had just settled in when her phone rang. Her mother didn't want Jennifer to worry, but her father was sick and in the hospital. He was feeling better and would probably be there for a few days. He had some kind of respiratory infection. Jennifer asked if she should go home, but her mother said no. They chatted a little more about her father's condition, and Jennifer seemed calmer after the call. We discussed this, and when we were getting ready to go to bed, I suggested, "What if we take next Friday and Monday off and fly to your parents? Judging by what your mom said, your dad should be out of the hospital by then." Jennifer agreed it was a great idea. I added with a smile, "And besides, you'll have the opportunity to show off your wonderful new boyfriend." She laughed and said, "Who will he be?" Then she pushed me onto the bed, jumped on me, and showered me with kisses. Soon I accompanied her to the airport. I carefully saved the signed job offer, which I happily handed over to Susan and George as soon as I returned to the office on Monday. On Wednesday, I met with interior designer Cheryl. She received a copy of the plans from a recent renovation, checked the dimensions were correct, and took lots of photos. I wanted her to come up with a design that Jennifer and I would then discuss. I wasn't stupid enough to start repairs without her participation. Jennifer and I got Friday and Monday off, so we booked flights to visit her parents. Jennifer confided in me that her relationship with Heather had cooled in the office. Heather only spoke to her when necessary and seemed happy that Jennifer would be away from the office for a while. Jennifer flew in from San Francisco on Thursday evening, and we had our first flight scheduled for Friday morning to her hometown of Madison, Wisconsin. Her father was feeling better and resting at home. Jennifer's mother, Molly, met us at the entrance to her parents' house. Jennifer hugged her mother tightly, and she took a moment to appreciate me and said, "So, you're the guy my daughter has been chatting about for the last few years. Welcome." Molly hugged me tightly, and I glanced at Jennifer, who was blushing incredibly red. "Are you talking about me?" I asked. "Well, I may have mentioned you to my parents a couple of times," Jennifer said with a smile. Her father, Arthit, was relaxing in a reclining chair and watching TV. When he started to stand up to greet us, Jennifer and her mother immediately advised him to stay put. He rolled his eyes in my direction, and I shrugged helplessly, expressing sympathy. Jennifer hugged her father, and I shook his hand. He said he was thrilled that Jennifer had finally found someone she was willing to bring home to introduce to her family. We spent the day talking. They told me the story of their emigration to the United States and why they chose Madison. I told them about myself, about my mother, and about the family I had rediscovered. After dinner, my father got tired and went to bed. Molly said he'll be fine again in a few days, so there's nothing to worry about. She then retreated to their bedroom, showing me the guest room. Jennifer just shrugged her shoulders. She had already warned me that her parents were quite conservative and we would have to sleep separately. They understood that they could not control what happened outside their home, but the rules in it were strict. I told her it was a small sacrifice worth making. On Saturday, we spent the day at the house. Jennifer had an MBA job, and I was helping her mother prepare dinner. That evening, Jennifer arranged for us to go out with her friends from school and university. They were all already married, and I had the feeling that a real interrogation awaited me. There were 12 of us in the restaurant. During dinner, her friends sized me up, and I felt more cooked than my steak. Jennifer looked at me from time to time with a big smile. Before dinner, she said she was happy to show off me. After dinner, we went to a dance club. She dragged me onto the dance floor, where I gave myself a shameful performance. While she was dancing with her friends, her best friend Harper sat next to me and said that she had never seen Jennifer so happy, so I must be doing something right. However, she warned that if I did anything to harm her, then 10 of us would be hunted down and get to the culprit. I replied that only true friends look out for themselves. I asked for her phone number so I could ask for advice about Jennifer if needed. We quickly exchanged numbers before Jennifer returned to the table. I think Harper and I looked guilty because Jennifer asked us what we were talking about. I simply replied that Harper told me how much pain I would be in if I did anything to hurt her. Jennifer laughed and then dragged Harper and I back to the dance floor. By the end of the night, we were exhausted. We kissed on the front deck of her parents' house before going to our beds for the night. Sunday turned out to be calm. Arthur felt much better and was already doing chores around the house. I was helping him in the yard when he, noticing that we were together, decided to talk about our relationship. "I hope you understand, but I'm worried about my only child," he said. "I understand. I hope that someday I will also worry about a child, and perhaps Jennifer will become the mother of this child," I answered. He smiled widely and hugged me tightly. I realized that I didn't know when we would see each other again, so I gave him a rough idea of my plans with his daughter. I made him keep it a secret and told him about the house, and if all went well, asked if I could ask her to marry me. He patted me on the back and said, "She's been talking about you all the last year. She said you were the perfect guy for her, but she felt bad that you were engaged to someone else. We just met, but so far you are meeting all expectations. You make my daughter very happy, and I am sure that you will be together for a long time. And if you ever decide to propose, I will be glad to welcome you into our family." I thanked him and hugged him tightly. Then he said, "I hope when the time comes, you can be in Los Angeles to see it." We smiled when we returned to the house. Jennifer looked at us suspiciously. "Why are you smiling like that?" I replied, "Arthur was just telling me how much trouble you got into as a child. I told him you still like getting into trouble," and winked at her. She blushed and slapped my hand. On Monday, we had to return home. Arthur and Molly hugged us tightly goodbye. Her father was almost fully recovered and expected to return to work later this week. On the plane on the way home, we chatted about the visit, her parents and friends. She said how much her parents loved me. Jennifer felt much more relaxed after spending time with her father and making sure he was going to be okay. On Tuesday at home, I called Jennifer's best friend, Harper, and asked if she could keep a secret from Jennifer. She agreed. I told her about the house and asked if I could put her in touch with my interior designer to help with choosing a style for Jennifer. My experience with her style was limited to her apartment, where the card table replaced the dining room, which did not suit her tastes at all. Harper enthusiastically agreed to help. Jennifer resigned from Heather. Heather and my mother suspected that it had something to do with me and my research, so they escorted her out. Jennifer was upset, but I reassured her over the phone that everything would be fine, which meant she could fully focus on completing her MBA. For the next 2 weeks, almost nothing happened. She came to see me in Los Angeles the following weekend, and I visited her the following weekend. One weekend in San Francisco, we met with the movers to discuss moving her belongings to Los Angeles. She was finishing her MBA this week, so she was ready to move to Los Angeles at the end of the week. Since she didn't know about the house, we decided that she would take as many clothes as possible on the flight Friday night to check into my apartment, and then we will return in the following weeks to move the remaining items. I met Jennifer at the airport and helped her carry her suitcases to my apartment. She bought several extra suitcases and paid for extra bags on the flight so she could bring as many of her belongings as possible. We ordered takeout trying to figure out where to put it all. Tomorrow was going to be the big day, although she didn't know it. When we finished, we were exhausted and went to bed. We got up early in the morning. She was about to finish unpacking, but I said we had an appointment at 10 o'clock. She asked where we were going. I said it was a surprise. We arrived at the house on time. I noticed the realtor's car waiting on the road. I pressed the remote control button on the gate, and the realtor followed me into the yard. As I got out of the car, I asked Jennifer if she remembered the realtor. She remembered, and they shook hands. When I opened the door, Jennifer immediately started asking questions. "Why are we here?" she asked. "Well, this is the house you liked, right?" I said, and she nodded before I continued. "We have papers you need to sign." "What documents?" she asked as the realtor took out paper and pen. "Well, you want your name on the title deed, don't you?" Her voice rose. "Are we buying this house?" "No, I already bought this house. Documents are only needed to add your name to the certificate." She just stared at me, not immediately understanding. I could see the thoughts swirling in her eyes as the facts and their consequences came to fruition. And then she jumped to me, hugged me, and kissed me deeply. She then ran to the realtor, jumping for joy and waiting for documents to be signed. The realtor smiled from ear to ear as we watched Jennifer sign the papers. He wished us luck and left. "Well, do you want to look around our house?" I asked with a smile. "You planned all this in advance, didn't you?" "Yes, I bought the house immediately after we saw it. I realized this was probably the house, so I asked the realtor to show it at the last minute. I wanted to surprise you." Holding each other's hands, we walked around the house. We discussed what could be done in one room and what in another. The first time Heather and I had sex, it was after a party where we were both very drunk, and other than the fact, we had little memory of what happened. I wanted my first experience with Jennifer to be special for both of us. As Jennifer approached the master bedroom, she stopped. I had the bed delivered to the master bedroom, so it was ready and placed red roses around it. I looked at her, took her face in my hands, and kissed her passionately, said, "I think I'm ready." She began to tremble as I removed the strap from one shoulder and kissed her shoulder. I then repeated this with the other strap and kissed the other shoulder. Then I gave her a long kiss, and she hugged me tighter than before. Her summer dress fell to the floor, and I motioned for her to lie down on the bed. Then, starting with her lips, I slowly moved down her body, kissing every part of it. She moaned as I gently touched her skin, running my lips over her neck and shoulders. I continued my way down, pausing at her waist, but instead of moving further, I switched to her legs, gently running my palms along them, moving back up. When I was next to her again, she stopped me with a playful smile. "Now it's my turn," she whispered. We stood up and her fingers began to unbutton the buttons on my shirt, leaving light kisses after each one. Then she pushed me onto the bed and, sliding her hands around my waist, unbuckled my belt and pulled down my pants. We remained in front of each other without extra layers of clothing, allowing our hands and lips to explore each other. There was tense silence in the room, interrupted only by our ragged breathing. Her fingers slid over my skin, causing goosebumps until our eyes met. I pulled her closer, feeling the warmth of her body, immersing myself in this moment where only the two of us existed. Time seemed to stand still, and all that mattered were the sensations pulsing between us. We lay next to each other, caressing each other and kissing tenderly. I said, "Welcome to your new home, my love." She giggled. "Well, since we have already baptized him, we cannot return him." Then she kissed me again and said, "I love you." After we made love for the first time, we held each other for a few minutes. "Do you want to take a shower together?" I asked. She took my hand and led me into the shower. I also left a few towels, robes, and other supplies. I found out what kind of shampoo she liked in advance, so the shower would be ready. We enjoyed our first shower together in the spacious cabin. We didn't have sex, but we made out, washed ourselves, and hugged. After finishing my shower, I looked at the clock on my phone and said, "Okay, we have 30 minutes to get ready." "Gather for what?" she asked. Lunch is delivered at 12:30. Wow, you're just full of surprises today, she said, and then, in a seductive voice, really pleasant surprises. As we dried off and put on our clothes, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and the interior designer walked inside. I introduced Cheryl to Jennifer and helped her carry all her things out of the car. Jennifer just stared and said, "It's not just lunch, right?" No, Cheryl is an interior designer, and I asked her to bring several design options for the house. We sat down and reviewed the proposals. Cheryl used software to create 3D models of each room. She prepared several options for most rooms. I thought the entryway, dining room, kitchen, living room, TV room, master bedroom, and dens would be priorities so we could move in as quickly as possible. The remaining rooms can be equipped later. Jennifer exclaimed, "Wow, Cheryl, you captured my style perfectly. Everything looks amazing." Cheryl replied, "Well, someone helped me." Jennifer looked at me questioningly and Cheryl continued, "Harper was a great help." Jennifer's head lifted. She looked at me and screamed, "Harper, my Harper, did she know about this?" I smiled widely. "Well, you didn't expect me to understand what style you like." She took out her phone and dialed a number. When someone answered, she said, "You bitch knew about the house and didn't tell me." I heard Harper laugh on the other end of the line. Then she said something and Jennifer added, "I love you too." She then looked at me with a mischievous smile and said to Harper, "Don't worry, I'll tell you everything." They said goodbye and hung up. We returned to the discussion. We chose what we wanted for the entryway, dining room, kitchen, living room, TV room, master bedroom, and offices. We have clarified several details. Then Cheryl said she would place orders for furniture and assemble a painting crew. She asked to give her a few days to agree on all the deadlines. We thanked her and saw her off. After she left, Jennifer hugged me tightly and said, "I love you. Tonight I will have sex with you to my heart's content." We cleaned up. Jennifer took some roses from the bedroom to move them back into the apartment. Towards dinner, we went to a nice restaurant to have dinner and talk about home and the future. Back at the apartment, she dragged me into the bedroom to make good on her promise to have plenty of sex with me. She handled it just fine. The next morning, I woke up with sore muscles I didn't know I had as I tried to get out of bed. Jennifer's career with Lhasa Chemicals began on Monday. She spent most of the day with Susan and the research group. The three of us had lunch with George. From the very beginning, Susan glanced at me and Jennifer laughed. I assumed they were discussing the events of the past weekend. All equipment was already installed, and the team could work at full capacity on the fuel. Jennifer and I communicated regularly with Cheryl, who coordinated the work on the house. Painting started this week, and the furniture was already on order and was due to arrive next week. On Friday, we returned to San Francisco to finalize things with her apartment. We were packing everything for the movers who would pick up the items and deliver them to the house on Sunday. Habitat for Humanity came to our house on Saturday to pick up all of our furniture since we were buying new furniture for the house, and she didn't need the old one, and it wasn't attached to anything. Of course, this meant that the beds were also being prepared for moving, so we stayed at a hotel. Everything went smoothly. After the movers took all the things, she handed over the keys to the apartment, and we returned to Los Angeles in her car. We met the movers at the house, and all our belongings were unloaded into one of the additional bedrooms. By the end of the weekend, we were exhausted. We were looking forward to moving into our new home in a few weeks. Another important event awaited me this week, a court hearing to change my name and transfer the trust fund to me. With the crack of a hammer, I officially became Thomas Hogan again. Back at the office, Ted and I completed the paperwork to transfer the trust to me and updated all the information associated with my new name. I thought I had huge capital, but the fund took 30 years to create and turned out to be even more valuable. Over the next 2 months, we worked tirelessly to make steady progress. At home, we finally furnished the new house. Every room was decorated and furnished. At work, Jennifer and I worked well together, even though she was the boss. We promised not to mix work with personal life. But this did not always work out, although the consequences were very pleasant. If we were having a bad day with lots of arguing, then after the fight the sex would be passionate and raw, and we would just take what we wanted from each other. If the day was good, the sex was energetic and exhausting. The rest of the time, the sex was slow, gentle, and very pleasant. We invited Harper and her husband over for a weekend to show them all the changes Harper helped the interior designer implement. Her husband and I enjoyed drinks by the pool while watching our lovers sunbathe in bikinis. We were nearing the end of our research. Patent applications, yes, applications were already being prepared for filing. Now we had to plan production. Jennifer and I decided we needed help and found the perfect candidate for a manufacturing leadership position. We were in a meeting with Susan and George discussing the project. Jennifer, as the research director, moderated the meeting, and I simply added my comments. Now let's move on to the next point. Tom and I decided we needed someone to lead the fuel production, Jennifer said. Susan and George nodded in agreement. Jennifer continued, so Tom and I have already identified and hired a candidate for this position. George intervened. I thought all hiring decisions had to be approved by Susan and me. We also have to participate in the interview process for such an important position. At that moment, I said, well, Jennifer and I had been talking with this candidate for over a month, and it took a little effort to convince him to accept the position. Susan asked, well, who is it? I stood up and walked to George's office door. Opening the door, I made a gesture inviting someone to enter. Patricia, Susan's daughter, entered. Let me introduce our new head of production, Patricia Hogan. I think you've met before, I said. Susan jumped up and hugged her daughter tightly. Are you sure? You used to resist joining the company, saying you wanted to go your own way. Well, Tom, my cousin and Jennifer were very convincing, and on top of that, the task of getting the fuel into production will be a great achievement for me. I couldn't refuse, Patricia replied. Then welcome to the company, George said proudly, hugging her and shaking her hand. Jennifer said, I believe we need to give you an introduction to the job, and walked Patricia into her new office, introducing her to the team. Susan hugged me and I said, we needed a chemist to set up production, and when one turns out to be in the family. Rumor has it that Apprentice Chemicals was having difficulty producing their fuel option at an economical price. It became an open secret. My mother, as CEO, found herself in a difficult situation, and the company's stock was plummeting. With the help of Ted and the investment firm where Patricia's fiancé, Jose, worked, I organized a group of numbered companies to buy Apprentice stock at discounted prices. I purchased shares in small quantities through these companies so as not to attract too much attention from the market or my mother. 4 months later, at Lossa Chemicals, we have finally reached the completion stage of our research. Unlike my mother, we proved that we had a solid production process and began negotiations with other chemical companies to license and produce the fuel. Press releases were issued, and we had a huge celebration for the entire Lossa Chemicals staff at an off-site event. There was a lot of eating, drinking, and dancing. George, Susan, and Jennifer gave speeches thanking everyone for their hard work and promising big bonuses this year, to the general delight of those present. Then I was called to say a few words. I stood not far from the hall, gathering a couple of special guests whom I had secretly invited to the event. As the calls for me grew louder, I walked into the room, followed by Jennifer's parents. I came forward, thanked everyone for their hard work, then walked up to Jennifer and told her that I had special words for a special woman. Jennifer, although we started out as dinner friends, you have become very important to me. You played a key role not only in the success of the development of this fuel, but also in supporting me. You gave me the confidence and desire to do things that I probably wouldn't have dared to do without you, I said, then got down on one knee. Jennifer started to cry. I continued, that's why I decided I couldn't live without you. I love you. Will you marry me? And took out the wedding ring. She jumped for joy and exclaimed, yes. Then she hugged and kissed me tightly. Everyone applauded and shouted joyfully. I put the ring on her finger. George, Susan, and her parents were the first to come up to congratulate us. The rest of the holiday passed in a blur. Jennifer's parents arrived the night before, but Jose was very helpful, escorting them from the airport to the hotel and then to today's celebration. They were supposed to be staying in the guest room of our house tonight. Once home, Jennifer gave them a tour of the house. They were impressed with the house, especially the pool and the view. We flew to San Francisco for dinner with my mother to tell her we were engaged. She was happy for us. Because of the situation at Prenti's, we talked about everything except chemistry. She wanted to know the details of the engagement and our wedding plans. She told me that Heather had started dating, and I said I was glad she was able to move on. The impact of our announcement on Prenti's Chemicals was devastating. My mother was removed from her position as CEO and chairman of the board of directors. The board of directors invited a person specializing in selling companies to replace them. The new CEO eliminated Heather's project and, as a result, fired her. I contacted Mom and Heather to see how they were doing. Since Mom still controlled 30% of the shares, she installed Heather and herself on the board of directors, representing her shares to ensure influence on future steps. She was still fighting for her company. I accelerated the purchase of shares, and through one of the numbered companies, we contacted the new chairman of Prenti's about our intention to buy Prenti's Chemicals. At that time, in addition to the 10% of the company that I already owned, I acquired another 20% of the shares. Due to the debt taken on to build production facilities for their version of the fuel, the stock has almost reached penny stock status. I assigned a senior executive at the investment firm where Jose worked to represent me in the initial negotiations. Finally, our proposal had to be presented to the Prenti's board of directors for approval. Along with the investment manager, George, Susan, Jennifer, Ted, and I attended the meeting. When George and Susan walked into the room with Ted and the investment manager, Mom stood up as soon as she recognized them. I think she was about to object until she saw Jennifer and I following behind them. I saw her expression change when she realized what was happening. Our investment director and I gave a presentation to the board. He introduced us all and my mother's jaw dropped when I was introduced as Tom Hogan. I didn't tell her that I had reverted to my real name. Yes, it was cruel of her, but her changing my last name to Prenti's and cutting my father's side out of my life was the final stumbling block between us. Now I felt that the score was settled. We made a presentation and offered a price for the remaining shares. As part of our deal, we were going to offer my mother a share in the new enterprise. Her 30% of Prenti's would be equivalent to 5% in the new company. If she agreed, the new combined entity would be called Hogan Prenti's Chemicals. If not, the new company would be called Hogan Chemicals. This was a kind of incentive for her to keep the Prenti's name. The board of directors voted to approve the deal, and my mother gave her consent to the exchange of shares. Before the merger, I owned 25% of Lossa Chemicals, Susan owned 25%, and George owned 50%. After the merger, George and Susan's shares were combined to 50%, my share increased to 45%, and Mom received the remaining 5%. In the following days, a strategy was developed to prepare the merged company. We were still a relatively small player in the chemical industry, so the merger did not require FTC review. We just had to wait for the stock purchase process to complete. I basically depleted my savings to purchase Prenti's, but when we completed adapting the production facility built for Heather's fuel to my fuel, we expected huge profits. Jennifer was put in charge of the merger process, and the executive committee included Patricia and newly hired Heather. Jennifer and I had a private celebration. One evening when we got home, she decided that wearing just a lab coat to go to the hot tub was the best way to celebrate. I had already brought 2 glasses of champagne and was sipping one when she approached. She took off her robe and, finding herself naked, joined me. We hugged each other in the water and enjoyed the view. Finally, Jennifer reached down with her hand and took my shorts off. She looked me in the eye and said, "You know you can control your breathing to hold it underwater." I nodded. "And you can control your breathing when you're pleasuring another person." I smiled, understanding where this was leading. I guess I'll have to see how the combination of the two works. She took a deep breath and disappeared under the water. It was amazing. However, after a while, I began to wonder how long she could continue. In the end, there was a real explosion in the water as she surfaced for air. After taking a few deep breaths, she said, "Well, it was an experiment that I think is worth repeating." She settled on my lap, gently pressing her back, and our movements became smooth and harmonious. I hugged her, stroking her warm skin, feeling how our breaths merged in the same rhythm. Her fingers slid over my arms, and I pulled her closer to me. The warmth covered us, growing with every moment. She threw her head back slightly, and I ran my lips along her neck, feeling how her body responded to every touch. We stayed like that for a long time, enjoying the closeness, before she turned to me and touched mine with her lips, sealing the moment with a long, deep kiss. Then a mischievous smile appeared on her face. She patted me on the shoulder and said, "Mark, the last one to be in the shower must please the other." She jumped out of the jacuzzi and ran. I realized that this time I would lose, since she had an advantage, so I decided to rush there while the water was still hot. She was already sitting on the bench in the shower, waiting for my touch. I gently ran my lips over her skin, enjoying every moment of her reaction. She sighed quietly, arching towards me. Our movements became more and more synchronized until we were completely lost in each other's sensations. Moist steam enveloped us, creating an atmosphere of solitude and intimacy. At that moment, only we existed, completely immersed in a whirlpool of emotions. After that, we got up, kissed passionately, and, using sponges, washed everything off each other from our heads to our feet. When we were done, we dried off and went to the bedroom where I held her, and we fell asleep. The merger went smoothly. When everything had calmed down, George called me into his office. He took out a bottle of whiskey and poured 2 glasses. Handing me one, he stared at it for a minute and said, "I think after all these years, it's time for me to finally retire. I believe the new company needs fresh perspectives from the next generation." I knew that he had long wanted to retire so that he and Nancy could enjoy the rest of their years without the stress of work. "Well, you know we'll miss you," I said. "I know, but I wanted to talk to you before I made the announcement," he continued, pausing and looking at me. "You're still planning on accepting that role at UCLA in their applied chemistry department, right?" I responded, "Yes, I really want to go back to my original plan after graduation to teach and do research in college." And laughing, he added, "Besides, I'm already tired of my fiancé being my boss." He laughed. "Good, because I didn't want there to be a family quarrel over my proposal for Susan to take over as president." I supported this proposal by saying, "She is the only one who comes to my mind to fill your shoes. You have my 45% of the company to support this move." "Great," he said. "And of course, we also need a vice president of operations. Do you think Jennifer can handle it?" I smiled and said, "I think she'll be delighted. When are you going to announce it?" "Since everyone is going to be at my place for dinner tonight, I think after dinner today would be appropriate." I toasted him, and we sat sipping our drinks and reminiscing about the past. As dinner drew to a close, George stood up to address the family. We were all there: George and Nancy, Susan and her whole family, my mother, Jennifer, and me. Only George, Nancy, and I knew what would happen next. Nancy and I talked, and it was time for me to step aside and retire, he announced. Surprised faces froze around the table. He continued, "With this new venture and new business, it is time for the next generation to take the reins. Since Tom and I control a significant portion of the company, we held an informal vote over drinks." He looked at Susan. "Susan, I think it's time for you to take over the company." She looked at me and I smiled, nodding at her in support. She stood up and said, "George, thank you. You have no idea what this means to me. I hope to cope with this task as well as you have done all these years." Then she came over and hugged him, and they whispered a few words. Susan glanced at me and then at Jennifer. I nodded again, understanding what was going on. "Jennifer," Susan continued, We will need to replace me as vice president of operations. Do you think you're ready for this? Jennifer looked even more shocked by another big revelation at dinner. She also looked at me and I smiled widely, letting her know that I fully supported her. She smiled and said to Susan, "Yes, I'll be glad. Thank you." There have been other changes at Hogan Prentice Chemicals. Jennifer had a long conversation with Heather. She knew that Heather had many ideas beyond fuels and persuaded her to take on the position of head of research. Heather was truly humbled by the failure of her project, and despite frequent clashes, they together created many innovations that enriched the company. Heather remained in San Francisco at the original Prentice headquarters, where the combined company's research division was located. She also moved away from me and started dating a math professor at Stanford. My mother moved to Boston and accepted an advisory position at Harvard. Her background in business and chemistry was valued by the departments of business, chemistry, and chemical engineering. 3 months after the merger was completed, Jennifer and I were married in a beautiful ceremony. Harper was her maid of honor and Jose was my best man. He and Patricia had married 2 months earlier. We spent our honeymoon touring Thailand. Jennifer's parents joined us for part of the trip to show off their country. Over the next 5 years, we had 3 beautiful children. My mother became ill, and before she passed away, we opened the Prentice Research Center at her beloved Harvard. She was very happy, knowing that our family name would forever be associated with Harvard, and she passed away peacefully. When Susan retired, Jennifer took over as president. The company continued to grow under their leadership, and I remained at UCLA until my retirement. Jennifer and I built the George Hogan Research Building at UCLA. We enjoyed retirement by relaxing by the pool, admiring the view, and watching the grandchildren. Jennifer still looks amazing in a swimsuit when she's in the hot tub. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.